My son was in the ER, but my parents chose Margaret, so I cut them off. Then everything changed. The ER waiting room smelled like antiseptic and dread. Eli's tiny hand was clammy in mine, his breathing ragged. I texted my mom. Eli's in the ER. Can you come? Her reply buzzed instantly. We're busy with Margaret, her cat's missing. Then like a knife twist. Stop exaggerating. That boy's always causing problems. I stared at the screen, my chest tightening. Eli's oxygen monitor beeped in rhythm with my racing heartbeat, causing problems. The words burned, like when I paid their bills after Dad's gambling debt, or when I bailed Margaret out of jail instead of attending Eli's first birthday. My parents had always favored Margaret. She was the crisis queen. Failed business ventures, DUIs, messy divorces, and every time I was the one who cleaned up her messes. Guilt was my currency. It started when I was 12, and Margaret almost drowned on my watch. I'd promised my parents, I'll always take care of you, and I had, for years. But this was different. Eli was 4. He'd stopped breathing after eating a cookie at daycare. The doctor said it was anaphylaxis, peanut cross-contamination. 10 minutes later, and she didn't finish. She didn't need to. I sat there clutching Eli's hand, replaying my mom's text. Her cat's missing. Really? A missing cat over her grandson's life? I felt the weight of every bill I'd paid, every favor I'd done. Every time, I'd put them first. And for what? The nurse came in, her voice soft. We're moving him to a room. He's stable now. I nodded, but my mind was already elsewhere. I needed to see them. I needed to know why. I drove to my parents' house, my hands gripping the wheel. The streetlights blurred as tears filled my eyes. When I pulled into their driveway, I saw them through the window, laughing, with Margaret and her very much alive cat. I stood there, frozen. The anger bubbled up, hot and unstoppable. I walked in, my voice shaking. Eli could have died, and you couldn't even answer your phone? My dad looked up, annoyed. Harper, stop being dramatic. He's fine. Fine? I snapped. You didn't even care enough to check. Margaret rolled her eyes. Here we go again. Always the martyr. That was it. I pulled out my phone and canceled every payment. Their mortgage, their car loan, their credit cards. You're on your own now. My dad's face turned red. You're dead to us. Margaret's our only daughter now. I walked out, my heart pounding, but as I got into my car, my phone buzzed. A text from Margaret. You've ruined them, but I need to tell you something. I stared at the screen, my stomach churning. What now? I didn't reply to Margaret's text. Not right away. My hands were still shaking as I drove back to the hospital, my mind racing. Eli was stable, but the doctor had warned me to stay close. Allergic reactions can escalate quickly, she'd said. I couldn't shake the image of his tiny body struggling to breathe, his face pale and panicked. When I got back to his room, he was asleep, his chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm. I sat beside him, brushing his hair back from his forehead. He looked so small in that hospital bed, so fragile, and yet he was my whole world. My phone buzzed again. Margaret, call me. It's important. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to ignore her, to block her number and never look back. But another part, the part that had spent years cleaning up her messes, felt that familiar pull of curiosity. What could she possibly have to say that would matter now? I stepped into the hallway and called her. She answered on the first ring. Harper, she said, her voice uncharacteristically serious. I know you're mad. I get it, but there's something you need to know. What? I snapped, my patience thin. She paused, and for a moment I thought she might hang up. Then she said, it's about the trust fund. I froze. What? Trust fund? The one Mom and Dad set up for us. Or, well, for me. Her voice was quiet, almost apologetic. They never told you, did they? My stomach dropped. What are you talking about, Margaret? When Grandma died, she left money for us. But Mom and Dad, they put it all in my name. They said you didn't need it because you were the responsible one. I leaned against the wall, my legs suddenly weak. How much? $500,000. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. $500,000. Money that could have paid for Eli's medical bills, for a better house, for college someday. Money that could have given us security, and they'd given it all to Margaret. Why are you telling me this now? I asked, my voice trembling. Because I'm tired of their lies, she said, and because I think they did something to Eli. I stiffened. What do you mean? I overheard them talking last week. They said something about teaching you a lesson. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, with Eli, my mind raced. Are you saying they tampered with his EpiPen? I don't know, she admitted, but you should check it. I hung up and rushed back to Eli's room. His EpiPen case was in his backpack, tucked into the side pocket. I opened it and froze. The EpiPen was there, but the seal was broken. And when I pulled it out, I noticed something sticky on the casing. I sniffed it. Peanut oil. My heart stopped. Someone had tampered with it. Someone had tried to hurt my son. I grabbed my phone and called the allergist. Ms. Blake, she said, her voice tense. We found peanut oil in his EpiPen case. Did someone tamper with? The line went dead as my phone died. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Then I heard a noise behind me. I turned. My parents were standing in the doorway. My parents stood in the doorway, their faces unreadable. My mom clutched her purse tightly, her knuckles white, while my dad's jaw was set in that stubborn way I knew all too well. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the steady beat of Eli's heart monitor. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice low and trembling. We came to check on Eli, my mom said, her tone clipped. Despite what you think of us, we do care. I wanted to scream. Care? They hadn't even answered my text when he was fighting for his life, but I bit my tongue, my eyes flicking to the EpiPen case still in my hand. Did you do this? I held up the case, my voice voice shaking. Did you tamper with his EpiPen? My dad's eyes narrowed. Don't be ridiculous, Harper. Why would we do something like that? Because you're angry, I shot back. Because I cut you off. Because you've always resented me for not being Margaret. My mom stepped forward, her face softening in that way she used to manipulate me. Honey, you're upset. You're not thinking clearly. Let's talk about this. No, I said, stepping between them and Eli's bed. You don't get to come in here and act like you care. Not after what you've done. My dad's face turned red. What we've done? You're the one who abandoned your family. You're the one who— Enough! I shouted, cutting him off. The monitor beeped faster as Eli stirred in his sleep. I lowered my voice. My hands clenched into fists. Get out, now. For a moment, they didn't move. Then my mom sighed, shaking her head. You'll regret this, Harper. You need us. I don't need you, I said, my voice steady now. I never did. They left, but the weight of their presence lingered. I sat back down beside Eli, my mind racing. Margaret's words echoed in my head. They said something about teaching you a lesson. I pulled out my phone and plugged it in, waiting for it to charge enough to turn back on. When it did, I called Margaret again. Did you talk to them? She asked immediately. They were here, I said. They denied everything, but I don't trust them. Margaret, if they did this— I know, she said quietly. Look, I'm not saying they're innocent, but you need proof before you do anything. Check their house. If they tampered with the EpiPen, there might be evidence. Their house? I repeated, incredulous. You want me to break into their house? I'm not saying break in, she said. You still have a key, don't you? I did. I'd kept it out of habit, even though I hadn't used it in years. What about you? I asked. Why are you helping me now? She hesitated. Because I'm tired of being their puppet, and because I think they've been lying to both of us. I didn't know what to say. Margaret and I had never been close, but this was the first time she'd ever been on my side. I'll think about it, I said finally. Be careful, Harper, she said before hanging up. I looked down at Eli, his face peaceful in sleep. Someone had tried to hurt him, and if it was my parents, I couldn't let that go. I called the nurse and asked her to keep an eye on Eli. Then I grabbed my coat and headed for the door. I was going to find the truth. The drive to my parents' house felt surreal. The streets were quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every sound, the hum of the engine, the crunch of gravel under tires, feel louder than it should. My hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, my mind racing with questions. What was I even looking for? Proof that they'd tampered with Eli's EpiPen? And if I found it, what then? I pulled into their driveway, the house looming in the dark. It looked the same as it always had. Neatly trimmed hedges, a porch light casting a warm glow, but now it felt sinister. I sat in the car for a moment, staring at the front door. You still have a key, don't you? I did. It was on my keychain, tucked between my car key and the one to my apartment. I hadn't used it in years, but I'd never gotten rid of it. Maybe some part of me had always known I'd need it again. I got out of the car and walked up to the door, my heart pounding. The key slid into the lock easily, and with a soft click, the door opened. The house was dark and silent. I stepped inside, closing the door quietly behind me. The familiar scent of my mom's lavender air freshener hit me, and for a moment, I was a kid again, sneaking in after curfew. But this wasn't a childhood memory. This was real. I moved through the house quickly, my phone flashlight guiding the way. I didn't know what I was looking for, but I knew where to start. My dad's study. He'd always been meticulous about his paperwork, and if there was evidence, it would be there. The study door creaked as I opened it. The room was exactly as I remembered it. Bookshelves lined with old novels, a desk cluttered with papers, and a filing cabinet in the corner. I went straight to the cabinet, pulling open the top drawer. It was filled with folders, each neatly labeled. Bills, taxes, medical records. I flipped through them quickly, my hands shaking. Then I saw it, a folder labeled Harper. I pulled it out and opened it. Inside were bank statements, all from an account I didn't recognize. My name was on them, but I'd never opened this account. And the balance, over $200,000. My stomach churned. What was this? I kept flipping through the folder. There were more statements, all from the same account. And then, at the bottom, a letter. It was from my grandmother's lawyer, dated a few years ago. Dear Mr. and Mrs. Blake, per your request, the trust fund has been divided as follows. $500,000 to Margaret Blake and $200,000 to Harper Blake. Please note that Harper's portion is to be held in a separate account until further instructions are given. I stared at the letter, my vision blurring. They'd kept this from me. For years, they'd kept this from me. And then I saw it. A note scribbled in the margin, in my dad's handwriting. Harper doesn't need it. She's always been the strong one. I sank into the chair, the folder slipping from my hands. All this time, I'd been struggling, paying their bills, bailing Margaret out, scraping by to take care of Eli. And they'd had this money that was meant for me. But that wasn't the worst part. At the bottom of the folder was a receipt from a medical supply store, dated 2 days ago, for peanut oil. I stared at the receipt, my hands trembling. Peanut oil, 2 days ago. The same day Eli had his allergic reaction. My mind raced, piecing together the timeline. They'd bought the oil, tampered with his EpiPen, and then, what? Waited for him to have a reaction? Hoped I'd blame myself for not being careful enough? I felt sick. This wasn't just neglect or favoritism. This was deliberate. They'd tried to hurt my son to punish me. I grabbed the folder and stuffed it into my bag, my heart pounding. I needed to get out of there. I needed to call the police. But as I turned to leave, I heard a noise downstairs. Footsteps. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. The house was supposed to be empty. My parents had left the hospital. They couldn't be back already. The footsteps grew louder, closer. I glanced around the study, looking for a place to hide. The closet was too small, the desk too exposed. My eyes landed on the window. I moved quickly, quietly, sliding the window open. The cool night air hit my face as I climbed out onto the roof. I crouched low, my heart racing, and peered back through the window. The study door opened, and my dad walked in. He looked around the room, his eyes narrowing as he noticed the open filing cabinet. He stepped closer, his gaze landing on the empty spot where the folder had been. "Harper," he muttered under his breath, his voice low and angry. I held my breath, pressing myself against the wall. If he looked out the window, he'd see me, but he didn't. He just stood there for a moment, his fists clenched, before turning and leaving the room. I waited until I heard his footsteps fade before climbing back inside. My legs were shaking, but I forced myself to move. I had to get out of there. I slipped out of the study and down the hall, my phone flashlight off now. The house was dark, but I knew the layout by heart. I made it to the front door and was about to open it when I heard voices. My parents. They were in the living room, talking in hushed tones. "She knows," my mom said, her voice tense. "What if she goes to the police?" "She won't," my dad replied. "She's too scared, and even if she does, we'll deny everything. It's her word against ours." I clenched my fists, anger burning in my chest. They thought they could get away with this. They thought I'd let them. I slipped out the door and ran to my car, my bag clutched tightly to my chest. As I drove away, I pulled out my phone and dialed Margaret. "Did you find anything?" she asked as soon as she answered. "Enough," I said, my voice shaking. "They bought peanut oil, Margaret. They tampered with Eli's EpiPen." She was silent for a moment. Then she said, "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to the police," I said, "and you're going to help me." Margaret hesitated on the other end of the line. "Harper, I don't know if that's a good idea. If you go to the police, it'll blow up everything. Mom and Dad will never forgive us." "Forgive us?" I snapped, my voice rising. "They tried to kill Eli, Margaret. They don't get to be forgiven." She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing, shallow and uneven. Finally, she said, "Okay, I'll help, but you need to be careful. If they find out you have evidence, they'll do whatever it takes to stop you." "I know," I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "Meet me at the police station and bring whatever you have on them." I hung up and drove straight to the station, my mind racing. The folder in my bag felt heavy, like it carried the weight of everything they'd done. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. And now, this. When I pulled into the parking lot, Margaret was already there, leaning against her car. She looked nervous, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "Did you bring it?" I asked as I got out of the car. She nodded, holding up a small USB drive. "Emails, texts, everything I could find. They've been planning this for months." "Harper, it wasn't just about the money. They wanted to control you." I took the drive, my hands trembling. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was scared. They've always had this hold over me, you know? Like no matter what I did, they'd always be there, pulling the strings. But after what happened to Eli, I couldn't stay quiet anymore. I didn't know what to say. For years, I'd resented Margaret for being the favorite, for always getting away with everything. But now, seeing the fear in her eyes, I realized she'd been just as trapped as I was. We walked into the station together, the folder and USB drive in hand. The officer at the desk looked up as we approached. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone polite but indifferent. "We need to report a crime," I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "Our parents tried to kill my son." The officer's expression changed immediately. He stood up, gesturing for us to follow him. "Come with me." We were led to a small room where a detective joined us shortly after. I handed over the folder and USB drive, explaining everything: the trust fund, the peanut oil, the tampered EpiPen. Margaret chimed in with details from the emails and texts, her voice shaking but determined. The detective listened carefully, taking notes. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression grim. "This is serious," he said. "We'll need to investigate further, but based on what you've given us, we can bring them in for questioning." "What happens next?" I asked, my heart pounding. "We'll get a warrant to search their house," he said. "If we find evidence linking them to the tampering, they'll be arrested." I nodded, relief and fear warring inside me. This wasn't over, not yet, but it was a start. As we left the station, Margaret turned to me. "What now?" "Now," I said, "we wait, and we make sure Eli stays safe." The next few hours were a blur. I drove back to the hospital, my mind spinning with everything that had happened. Margaret followed in her car, her face pale and drawn. When we got to Eli's room, he was still asleep, his breathing steady. I sat beside him, holding his hand, while Margaret paced nervously by the window. "What if they come here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What if they try to finish what they started?" "They won't," I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it. "The police are watching them. They can't do anything without getting caught." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the fear. My parents had always been manipulative, but this was different. This was dangerous. The nurse came in to check on Eli, her expression kind but concerned. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I've been better," I admitted, "but he's okay, and that's all that matters." She nodded, adjusting his IV. "He's a strong little guy. He'll pull through this." I hoped she was right. Margaret's phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen. "It's Mom," she said, her voice tight. "She's calling me." "Don't answer it," I said quickly. "Not until the police have talked to them." She hesitated, then silenced the call. "What if they know we went to the police? What if they're trying to warn us off?" "Let them try," I said, my voice firm. "They're not in control anymore." But deep down, I wasn't so sure. My parents had always been good at playing the victim. at twisting things to make themselves look innocent. What if the police believed them? What if they got away with it? My phone buzzed, and I jumped. It was the detective. Ms. Blake, he said when I answered. We've executed the search warrant. We found the peanut oil in their house, along with some concerning documents. We're bringing them in for questioning now. What kind of documents? I asked, my stomach churning. Plans, he said grimly. Detailed plans. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. They've been plotting this for a while. I felt sick. What happens now? We'll keep you updated, he said. But for now, stay where you are and keep your son safe. I hung up, my hands shaking. Margaret looked at me, her eyes wide. What did they say? She asked. They found the oil, I said, and more. They're bringing them in. She sank into a chair, her face pale. This is really happening, isn't it? I nodded, though I could barely process it myself. My parents, the people who were supposed to protect me, to love me, had tried to hurt my son, and now they were going to pay for it. But as I sat there watching Eli sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over, that somehow they'd find a way to twist this, to make it my fault. And then, my phone buzzed again. It was a text from an unknown number. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. I stared at the text, my heart pounding. The words seemed to burn into the screen. Cold and threatening. You think you've won, but you have no idea what's coming. What is it? Margaret asked, her voice tense as she leaned over to see my phone. I showed her the message, and her face went pale. Who sent that? I don't know, I said, my voice shaky. It's an unknown number. It has to be them, she said, her eyes wide with fear. They're trying to scare you. They know the police are onto them, and they're panicking, or they're planning something worse, I said, my mind racing. I quickly forwarded the text to the detective, adding a note. Received this just now. Unknown number. Please advise. Within minutes, my phone rang. It was the detective, Ms. Blake, he said, his tone urgent. We're tracking the number, but it's likely a burner phone. For now, stay where you are. We're sending an officer to the hospital to keep an eye on you and your son. Thank you, I said, relief and fear warring inside me. What about my parents? Have they said anything? They're denying everything, he said, but we've got enough evidence to hold them for now. We'll keep you updated. I hung up and turned to Margaret. They're sending someone to watch us. We just need to stay here and wait. She nodded, but her hands were trembling. Harper, what if they're not working alone? What if someone else is helping them? The thought hadn't occurred to me, but now it sent a chill down my spine. My parents had always been resourceful, and they had connections, people who owed them favors, who might be willing to do something like this. We'll be okay, I said, trying to sound confident. The police are handling it. We just need to stay calm. But calm was the last thing I felt. Every sound in the hallway made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move. I kept glancing at Eli, his small chest rising and falling as he slept. He was so innocent, so unaware of the danger swirling around him. The officer arrived about 20 minutes later, a tall woman with a no-nonsense demeanor. She introduced herself as Officer Reyes and assured us she'd be stationed outside the I room. No one's getting in or out without my say-so, she said firmly. You're safe here. I thanked her, but the knot in my stomach didn't loosen. Safe felt like a fragile concept now, something that could shatter at any moment. Margaret and I sat in silence for a while, the tension thick between us. Finally, she spoke. Harper, I'm sorry for everything. I should have told you about the trust fund sooner. I should have stood up to them years ago. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, I saw the guilt in her eyes. She wasn't just scared, she was ashamed. It's not your fault, I said quietly. They manipulated both of us, but we're done letting them control us. After this, we're free. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I just hope Eli's okay. He will be, I said, though I wasn't sure if I was trying to convince her or myself. And then, as if on cue, Eli stirred in his sleep, his small hand reaching out. I took it, holding it tightly. We'll get through this, I whispered, more to him than to anyone else. I promise. But as I sat there, the text still burning in my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Officer Reyes stayed outside the door, her presence a small comfort, but the weight of the unknown pressed down on me. Margaret eventually dozed off in the chair beside me, her head resting against the wall. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my parents' faces, cold, calculating, and full of malice. Eli's monitor beeped steadily, a reminder that he was still here, still fighting. I held his hand, my thumb brushing over his tiny fingers. You're so brave, I whispered to him. Mommy's going to make sure nothing hurts you ever again. My phone buzzed and I flinched. It was the detective, Ms. Blake, he said when I answered. We've got some updates. First, the number that texted you. It's untraceable, but we're working on it. Second, your parents are still in custody, but they're not talking. They've lawyered up. What about the evidence? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. It's solid, he said. The peanut oil, the receipts, the documents we found, it's enough to charge them, but we're still building the case. We need to make sure it's airtight. I nodded, though he couldn't see me. What do I do now? Stay where you are, he said. We've got eyes on the hospital, and we're monitoring your parents' associates. If anyone tries to contact you, let us know immediately. I hung up and leaned back in the chair, exhaustion pulling at me. But just as I was about to close my eyes, my phone buzzed again. Another text. You can't hide forever. My breath caught in my throat. I showed it to Officer Reyes, who immediately called it in. We're going to increase security, she said. No one's getting near you or your son. I nodded, but the fear was creeping in, cold and unrelenting. Someone was watching us. Someone knew where we were. Margaret woke up, her eyes bleary. What's going on? I showed her the text, and her face went pale. Harper, what if it's not just mom and dad? What if they hired someone? The thought made my stomach churn. My parents had money they'd kept from me, money they could use to pay someone to hurt us. We'll be okay, I said, though the words felt hollow. The police are here. They'll protect us. But as the hours passed, the texts kept coming. You shouldn't have gone to the police. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Say goodbye to Eli. The last one sent me into a panic. I called the detective, my voice shaking. They're threatening my son. You have to do something. We're working on it, he said, his tone urgent. We've traced the text to a location near the hospital. We're sending a team to check it out. I hung up and clutched Eli's hand, my heart racing. Please, I whispered. Please let him be okay. Margaret stood up, pacing the room. We can't just sit here. What if they're already in the building? We have to trust the police, I said, though I wasn't sure if I believed it anymore. And then the lights flickered. The room went dark for a moment before the emergency lights kicked in, casting an eerie glow. My heart stopped. What's happening? Margaret asked, her voice trembling. I didn't answer. I was too busy staring at the door where a shadow had just moved. The shadow shifted again, and my breath caught in my throat. I stood up, positioning myself between Eli's bed and the door. Margaret froze, her eyes wide with fear. Officer Reyes? I called out, my voice trembling. No answer. The door creaked, opened slowly, and a figure stepped inside. It wasn't Officer Reyes. It was a man I didn't recognize, tall, with a hood pulled low over his face. He held something in his hand, glinting in the dim emergency light. A knife. Stay back, I shouted, my voice cracking. Margaret grabbed a chair, holding it in front of her like a shield. Get out of here, she screamed. The man didn't say a word. He just stepped closer, his movements deliberate, his eyes locked on Eli. Heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I glanced around the room looking for something, anything, to defend us. The IV stand, the tray table, nothing useful. What do you want? I demanded, my voice shaking. He didn't answer. He just kept coming. And then Eli's monitor started beeping faster. His breathing hitched, his small body twitching in the bed. No, I cried, turning to him. Eli, stay with me. The man lunged. Margaret swung the chair, hitting him in the side. He stumbled but didn't go down. He turned to her, his expression cold, and raised the knife. I grabbed the IV stand and swung it with all my strength. It hit him in the shoulder, and he grunted, dropping the knife. He turned to me, his eyes blazing, and grabbed the stand, yanking it out of my hands. Harper, run! Margaret shouted, but there was nowhere to go. The man raised the stand, ready to strike, when a voice boomed from the doorway. Freeze! Police! Officer Reyes stood there, her gun drawn, her face fierce. The man hesitated, then dropped the IV stand and bolted for the window. Stop! Reyes shouted, but he was already climbing out. She ran to the window, firing a shot into the air, but he was gone, disappearing into the night. I collapsed beside Eli's bed, my legs giving out. His monitor was still beeping erratically, and I clutched his hand, tears streaming down my face. Eli, please, I begged. Stay with me. Margaret knelt beside me, her hands shaking. Harper, we need to get help. Officer Reyes was already on her radio, calling for backup and a medical team. Within minutes, nurses and doctors rushed into the room, pushing us aside to tend to Eli. I stood there, numb, watching as they worked on him. Margaret wrapped an arm around me, her face pale. He's going to be okay, she whispered. He has to be. But I couldn't shake the image of the man's cold eyes, the way he'd looked at Eli like he was nothing. The detective arrived shortly after, his expression grim. We've got teams searching the area, but he's gone for now. We'll find him. I nodded, but the words didn't comfort me. Someone had gotten past the police. Someone had tried to hurt my son, and I had no idea who they were. The hospital was in chaos. Officers swarmed the halls, their radios crackling with updates. Eli was stabilized, but the doctors kept him under close observation, his small body hooked up to more machines than before. I sat beside him, my hand never leaving his, while Margaret paced the room, her face pale and drawn. The detective pulled me aside, his voice low. We've identified the man who attacked you. His name is Victor Crane. He's a known associate of your parents, a private investigator they've used in the past. My stomach dropped. So they hired him to hurt Eli? It looks that way, he said grimly. We're bringing them in for further questioning, but we need to keep you and Eli safe. We're moving you to a secure location. I nodded, though my mind was spinning. My parents had hired someone to hurt their own grandson. The thought made me sick. What about Margaret? I asked, glancing at her. She'll come with you, the detective said. We're not taking any chances. Margaret stopped pacing and looked at me, her eyes filled with guilt. Harper, I'm so sorry. I didn't know they'd go this far. It's not your fault, I said, though the words felt hollow. None of this would have happened if she'd told me about the trust fund sooner, but blaming her wouldn't change anything. The medical team prepared Eli for transport, his small body dwarfed by the equipment surrounding him. I followed closely, my heart breaking with every beep of the monitor. We were taken to a safe house on the outskirts of town, a nondescript building surrounded by officers. The detective assured us it was secure, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. That night, as Eli slept and Margaret dozed on the couch, I sat by the window, staring out at the dark street. My phone buzzed, and I flinched. It was another text. "You can't run forever." I showed it to the officer stationed in the room, who immediately called it in. "We're tracking the number," he said, "but it's likely another burner." "Phone." I nodded, though I didn't feel reassured. Someone was still out there, still threatening us. The next morning, the detective arrived with an update. "We've got Victor Crane in custody. He's talking, and he's implicating your parents." "What did he say?" I asked, my voice trembling. "He confirmed they hired him to intimidate you," the detective said, "but he claims he wasn't supposed to hurt Eli. He says your parents only wanted to scare you into dropping the charges." "Scare me?" I repeated, my voice rising. "By breaking into a hospital and threatening my son?" The detective nodded, his expression grim. "We're building the case, Harper, but we need you to stay strong. This isn't over yet." I looked at Eli, his small chest rising and falling as he slept. He was so innocent, so unaware of the danger he'd been in. "It's never going to be over, is it?" I whispered. The detective didn't answer. He didn't need to. The days blurred together in the safe house. Eli slowly regained his strength, his laughter returning in small bursts that felt like sunlight breaking through a storm. Margaret stayed close, her guilt slowly giving way to a quiet determination to make things right. The police kept us updated, but the investigation dragged on, each new piece of evidence more chilling than the last. My parents were charged with conspiracy, attempted assault, and endangerment of a child. The media picked up the story, and it exploded. Headlines about a family torn apart by greed and manipulation. Reporters camped outside the safe house, their cameras trained on the door, but I refused to speak to them. This wasn't a story for them to sensationalize. It was my life. Victor Crane cut a deal with the prosecution, testifying against my parents in exchange for a reduced sentence. His testimony was damning. He detailed their plans, their threats, their cold disregard for Eli's life. It was hard to listen to, but I forced myself to sit through every word. I needed to hear it. I needed to understand how far they'd fallen. The trial was set for the following month, but the detective warned me it would be a long process. "They're going to fight this," he said. "They're not going down without a fight." I nodded, but I wasn't afraid anymore. They'd taken so much from me. My trust, my peace, my sense of safety. But they hadn't broken me, and they hadn't taken Eli. One evening, as the sun set outside the safe house, Margaret sat beside me on the couch. "What happens after this?" she asked quietly. "I don't know," I admitted, "but we'll figure it out together." She smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I'm sorry, Harper, for everything." "I know," I said, squeezing her hand, "and I forgive you." It wasn't easy to say, but it was true. We'd both been victims of our parents' manipulation, and holding on to anger would only keep us trapped in their shadow. Eli toddled over, his favorite stuffed animal clutched in his hand. "Mommy, up," he demanded, his voice full of life, scooped him into my arms, holding him close. "You're my brave boy," I whispered, kissing his forehead, "and no one's ever going to hurt you again." He giggled, squirming in my arms, and for a moment, everything felt okay. The detective called later that night with another update. "We've found more evidence," he said. "Emails, bank transfers, everything we need to make sure they never walk free." "Thank you," I said, my voice steady, "for everything." "You're safe now, Harper," he said. "That's what matters." I hung up and looked out the window, the stars twinkling in the night sky. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. The road ahead would be long, and the scars would take time to heal. But we were alive, we were together, and we were free. As I turned away from the window, Eli's laughter filled the room, a sound so pure it felt like a promise. We were going to be okay.